And I also had an uncle that was involved in the Colombo crime family. He was a Colombo crime enforcer. His name was Vinny Aspermonte. And he was close with Michael Franzese at one time, and they made a lot of money together. So, with that being said, there was a lot of it in my background, and I didn't know it until I, was able to realize what it was about. And obviously, I gravitated towards that. I did a lot of running for guys per se that were made men in the Colombo crime family. Two in particular was a gentleman by the name of Jimmy Gooch, who has since passed, and another guy by the name of Bobby Bibbs, who had a jewelry store. And they were not mentors, but these were guys that I did a lot of things for, and they were very fond of me at one time. Latter part of my year, I started doing armed robberies, and I was involved in a jewelry store robbery in New York, in Brooklyn, and subsequently the owner of the shop got shot, and he ultimately passed away from my gunshot wounds that I inflicted on him. So with that being said, I was sentenced to 15 to life. I ended up doing 18 and a half years on that. And essentially, when I got out in 2007 on parole, I started to venturing back into what I knew. And I was in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn in 2007. And I received 2 gunshot wounds to my abdomen, and I almost died. And I was rushed to the hospital, and I survived. And I turned my life around. I moved I moved to Florida, and that's where my journey began after that.
Okay. And before we get into that part, what was your first activities as like kind of like doing criminal activity wise?
Arson, picking up money, breaking people's legs. The quintessential mob activity to collect whatever we needed to get.
Okay. And then ultimately I think you said that you at one point were, kind of like a pimp.
Yeah, it's a funny story, and I don't want people to take it the wrong way. Like I was a legitimate pimp on a street taking women's money. I ran a hotel in Coney Island called the Clement Hotel, and this hotel was a seedy 4-hour stay hotel that would cater to obviously hookers, and all these girls worked in front of the hotel and on the street on 15th Street, and they would come in, and I was the caretaker of the hotel. I worked there, and I would collect the money and whatnot for their tricks and johns or whatever you want to call them. And they would rent short stays, and they'd bring their johns in there and do whatever they did, and they would come out and they would say, "Danny, do me a favor, hold this money." And so by default, I became essentially a pimp. They would hand me all this money, and they say, "We'll be back tomorrow to pick it up." And it was just quite weird. It was quite weird how I became quote unquote a pimp per se.
The accidental
Yeah.
pimp.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah.
So was there any, like, they were just kind of worried that, the guys wouldn't pay them, or how come they wanted you to
Well,
do this?
well, obviously they wouldn't. Back then in the '80s, you had a lot of Johns that would rob the girls, and so they wouldn't want to carry a lot of money on them. So what they would do is essentially just tell me to hold it down, and they'd be back later for it or what have you. So that's how that would work. A lot of these guys were seedy characters to boot, and they were trying to get an angle on the girls as well. And not to say the girls weren't trying to get an angle on them, but it was funny. It was just funny how this all transpired.
Yeah. Did you ever have to do anything? Like, did someone
No,
didn't
it's
pay?
yeah, it's the funny thing. It was never even like that. It was like I think a presence was more scary than anything, that there was somebody actually there, so they would think twice of
Yeah.
doing anything.
No.
So
Okay. Yes. So that was like your early operations and stuff, and then
yeah, it was.
eventually it led on to, like you said, the working, doing like breaking legs, and what would that look like? Collecting? Would that be like collecting money, or people not paying stuff to the
Yeah, it would.
mob?
Yeah, it would be whatever substantiated what they wanted, and that could be from money, that could be for anything. It could be for jewelry, it could be whatever gain monetarily or something like that they wanted or needed. Then obviously violence came into play. It wasn't always violence. If you were good with your mouth, and you could actually, talk these people into certain things, that was the better avenue. But obviously, violence with the mob is pretty prevalent, and that's how they got their point across.
Oh, okay. So while you were, kind of active during this time, was your uncle still around and you were doing stuff with him too?
Well, I never did anything directly with him, but
Uh-huh.
my uncle was involved in a very lucrative and very substantial counterfeit ring of money. I think they caught him with over $500,000 in his trunk of his car. And the feds, and you can probably read this in the New York Times, I believe it was in the late 60s, early 70s, that the federal government said this is the best money they've ever found or seized or saw. It was so legitimately real that it was almost obsolete as far as knowing it was fake. So it was pretty interesting. But my uncle made a lot of money. He was very smart, if you want to call him that, in the realm of making money and being part of an organization that was pretty much rootless at the time.
Yeah, and you said he was part of Michael Francese's crew too. So, did he ever talk to you about him or any relationship that they had?
Well, yeah. Well, I'll reiterate on something I said on past podcasts. I met Michael many many years ago, and I believe it was in '83 or '82, if I'm not mistaken. And my uncle lived in West Islip, and he used to come over to my uncle's house, and I was there one day, and I never spoke to Michael, but Michael nodded at me, hello, and they went out by the pool and they started talking. But my uncle really didn't like Michael. He had some things to say about Michael. He only stayed with Michael because he was able to make a lot of money. And when I tell you a lot of money, I'm talking about duffel bags full of money. It's something out of a movie. And they used to call my uncle Fat Vinny or the Butcher. And he was a big guy. And he used to carry 2 duffel bags, and this is the God's honest truth, over each shoulder. And it was just stacked with money. It was insane. So, it was dog eat dog, or it was what you can get out of me and what I can do for you. That's how it operated. And my uncle, didn't like Michael, but he made a ton of money with Michael.
Yeah, so sometimes that overcomes that, dislike you'll just put up with, to make some money and stuff.
Absolutely. Yeah. Sure.
So,
Absolutely.
so how many? I guess since he was there for a while, did he ever meet Sonny Franchise then? I mean, because he was a lot
Yeah.
older.
My uncle was around Sonny. They went to a coffee shop together a lot of times, and he had a good rapport with Sonny.
That's good. Yeah, because I mean, he just passed away. What, a few years ago, or I can't
Yeah.
remember.
It's kind of sad because I know I don't know who watches your program, but I have issues with Michael Franzese. He's a glorified Christian guy. He believes that he's born again, and he fights that narrative about he's the good guy. And this, that, and the third. I'm just going to say this, and you guys can take it for what it's worth. Michael never did anything for his father. Michael came to see his father 2 times. Never bought him any clothes, shoes. Sonny was always disheveled looking. And my friend Greg Vita, who was a very good close friend with Sonny Franzese, who was instrumental on getting him out of jail, believe it or not, he did everything for Sonny, pretty much. And Michael just came with cameras to see, hey, yeah, I'm here to see my father. So I don't consider Michael Franzese a man. I think he's a jerk.
Hey, thanks for watching this clip. This clip came from one of my interviews I did in the past. Please hit subscribe if you want to get more clips like this. Also, if you want to watch the full interview, I'll put a link in the description. Or you can hit the button on the screen to watch the full interview.